The engine of one of the Navy's most advanced submarines failed during a critical underwater mission in hostile waters. Nuclear engineers ran diagnostics, checked every pump, tested every cooling circuit. Nothing worked. Just when it seemed like the submarine would have to emergency surface and abort the mission, someone mentioned an old, forgotten name. When Michael Thompson walked into the engine room, wearing faded coveralls, a brass rod in hand, and demanded complete silence from everyone. No one there realized he wasn't just there to fix a mechanical problem. He was there to reclaim something stolen from him, his reputation. Michael Thompson lived in a modest apartment just outside the Norfolk Naval Base. The place was small but meticulously organized, filled with vintage submarine manuals and acoustic analysis equipment from decades past. Since he was young, Michael had possessed an extraordinary gift for diagnosing engine problems through sound alone. At 68, he still moved with the precision of someone who understood submarine engines better than their own designers. But one catastrophic incident had changed everything, forcing him into early retirement under a cloud of unjust blame. Before we continue, if you believe true expertise should never be dismissed, type expertise below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story hits different when I know who's standing with Michael Thompson. I read every comment. Michael's apartment was a testament to his dedication to submarine engineering. Technical manuals from the 1980s lined his shelves, their pages worn but carefully preserved. On his workbench sat a collection of acoustic diagnostic tools, most considered obsolete by modern standards but still perfectly functional in the right hands. The walls displayed photographs from his naval career, submarines cutting through icy waters, engine rooms he'd personally designed improvements for, and engineering teams that had once sought his guidance on the most complex problems. But the centerpiece of his collection was that brass rod, solid and worn smooth on both ends from decades of use. Every morning, Michael followed the same routine. He'd brew coffee in a dented aluminum pot, the same type used aboard submarines. He'd review technical specifications for submarine propulsion systems, keeping his knowledge sharp even in retirement. The morning news would play in the background, often featuring stories about naval operations that he knew he could have contributed to. His neighbors in the apartment complex knew him as a quiet, respectful man who kept to himself. They had no idea that the unassuming figure who collected his mail each morning had once been one of the Navy's most gifted submarine engineers. They didn't know that his expertise had helped design propulsion systems that powered some of America's most advanced underwater vessels. Michael had grown up in a working-class family in Detroit, where his father worked in an automotive plant. From an early age, he'd shown an unusual ability to diagnose mechanical problems by listening to engines run. His father would bring him to the plant on weekends, where Michael would amaze the mechanics by identifying issues they'd missed with their sophisticated equipment. At 17, he'd rebuilt a motorcycle engine using only basic tools and his ability to hear what was wrong. By 20, he was fixing boat engines for local fishermen who couldn't afford professional repairs. It was a gift that seemed almost supernatural to those who witnessed it, the ability to understand what machines were trying to communicate through their sounds. This talent led him naturally to the Navy, where submarine engineering became his calling. He worked his way up through the ranks, earning respect for his innovative diagnostic techniques and his uncanny ability to solve problems that stumped entire engineering teams. His methods were unconventional, but his results spoke for themselves. For over 2 decades, Michael served with distinction, contributing to the development of propulsion systems that would revolutionize submarine technology. His acoustic diagnostic methods became legendary among submarine engineers, though few understood exactly how he did what he did. Michael's career took a devastating turn during what should have been a routine training exercise. He was serving as the lead propulsion engineer aboard the USS Virginia, one of the Navy's newest fast-attack submarines. The mission was straightforward, a deep-water navigation exercise in the Atlantic, testing the submarine's stealth capabilities. Everything went perfectly for the first 12 hours. The submarine performed flawlessly, its engines running at optimal efficiency as they descended to operational depth. Michael monitored the propulsion systems from the engine room, his experienced ear detecting the subtle harmonics that indicated everything was functioning as designed. Then, without warning, the primary cooling system for the nuclear reactor began showing anomalous readings. Temperature gauges fluctuated wildly, coolant pressure dropped unexpectedly, and alarms began sounding throughout the submarine. The reactor was at risk of overheating, a potentially catastrophic situation that could endanger the entire crew. Michael immediately began his diagnostic routine, using his brass rod to listen to the cooling pumps and circulation systems. Within minutes, he identified what he believed was the problem: a resonance issue in the primary coolant loop that was causing pump cavitation. He recommended immediate shutdown of the affected system and switching to emergency cooling protocols. The submarine's commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, trusted Michael's judgment completely. They'd worked together before, and Reynolds had seen Michael solve impossible problems through his acoustic methods. The emergency protocols were implemented, and the submarine safely surfaced without incident. However, when the Navy's investigation team boarded the submarine, they found no evidence of the mechanical failure Michael had diagnosed. The cooling pumps showed no signs of cavitation, the systems tested within normal parameters, and all equipment appeared to be functioning correctly. The investigators concluded that the alarm had been triggered by a sensor malfunction, not an actual mechanical problem. What Michael couldn't have known was that the resonance issue he detected was intermittent, occurring only under specific operational conditions that weren't replicated during the post-incident testing. The investigation team, relying on standard diagnostic equipment and protocols, found no corroborating evidence for his assessment. The final investigation report was brutal in its conclusions. It stated that the emergency surface order had been based on unsubstantiated acoustic analysis and non-standard diagnostic procedures. Michael was cited for failure to follow proper engineering protocols and causing unnecessary mission abort due to inadequate technical assessment. The report went further, questioning whether Michael's unconventional methods were suitable for modern submarine operations. It suggested that his reliance on outdated acoustic techniques posed a potential risk to submarine safety and mission effectiveness. The language was professional, but the message was clear. Michael's methods were being labeled as obsolete and potentially dangerous. Captain Reynolds tried to defend Michael's assessment, pointing out his decades of successful diagnoses and his track record of preventing actual mechanical failures. But the investigation team was more interested in measurable data than testimonials about intuitive abilities. They had sensors, computers, and standardized procedures. They didn't need someone listening to engines with a brass rod. Within weeks, Michael was quietly reassigned to a desk job at the Naval Engineering Command. The official explanation was that he was being moved to a position where his extensive experience could benefit the broader submarine program. In reality, he was being removed from operational submarines and placed where his unconventional methods couldn't cause further embarrassment. The desk assignment lasted only 6 months before Michael was offered early retirement. The offer came with a generous pension package and a suggestion that it would be in everyone's best interest if he accepted. The message was unmistakable. His career in submarine engineering was over. Michael signed the papers on a gray October morning, cleaning out his desk while his former colleagues avoided making eye contact. He took his brass rod, his technical manuals, and his photographs, leaving behind over 20 years of dedicated service and a reputation that had been quietly destroyed by a single investigation report. The brass rod that Michael carried wasn't just a diagnostic tool. It was a direct connection to the golden age of submarine engineering. It had been crafted in 1963 by Master Chief Petty Officer James Mitchell, a legendary submarine engineer who had served aboard some of the Navy's first nuclear submarines. Mitchell had handmade the rod from solid brass, carefully balancing its weight and density to provide optimal acoustic transmission. Mitchell had been Michael's mentor when he first joined the submarine service as a young petty officer. The older engineer had recognized Michael's natural gift for acoustic diagnosis and had personally trained him in the art of mechanical listening. The brass rod had been Mitchell's retirement gift to Michael, passed down with the words, "This rod has helped solve problems that computers couldn't even detect. Use it wisely." The rod was 8 inches long, perfectly cylindrical, with ends worn smooth from decades of contact with metal surfaces and human skin. Its weight was precisely calibrated, heavy enough to provide stable contact with machinery, light enough for extended use without fatigue. The brass had developed a deep patina over the years, giving it a golden-brown color that seemed to glow in the right light. To most people, it looked like nothing more than a simple metal rod, perhaps a tool handle or a piece of scrap metal. But to Michael, it represented the accumulated wisdom of generations of submarine engineers who had diagnosed problems through sound, touch, and intuition long before sophisticated sensors existed. In his apartment, Michael had created a small workshop where he maintained the rod and practiced his acoustic techniques. He'd built a collection of sound samples, recordings of various submarine engine problems that he'd encountered over the years. Using headphones and his brass rod, he'd practice identifying different types of mechanical issues, keeping his skills sharp even in retirement. The neighbors occasionally heard strange sounds coming from his apartment, the rhythmic tapping of metal on metal, the hum of recorded engines, the subtle vibrations of acoustic testing equipment. They assumed he was working on some kind of hobby project, never imagining that he was maintaining expertise that could save lives in submarine emergencies. Michael's daily routine revolved around staying connected to the submarine engineering community, even from the outside. He subscribed to technical journals, monitored naval engineering forums, and kept detailed notes on new submarine technologies. He knew the specifications of every submarine in the U.S. fleet, understood their propulsion systems, and could diagnose their potential problems from published technical data alone. But the brass rod remained unused for actual diagnostics. There were no submarine engines to listen to, no mechanical problems to solve, no crews depending on his expertise. It sat on his workbench like a reminder of what he'd lost. Not just a career, but a calling that had defined his entire adult life. Michael supported himself through a modest consulting business, helping local boat owners with engine problems. His reputation in the civilian marine community was excellent. Boat owners knew that if Michael Thompson couldn't fix an engine problem, it probably couldn't be fixed. But these small marine engines were child's play compared to the sophisticated propulsion systems he'd once worked on. The irony wasn't lost on him. While the Navy had decided his methods were obsolete, civilian boat owners paid premium rates for his acoustic diagnostic services. He could identify engine problems in seconds that would take other mechanics hours to diagnose with modern equipment. His brass rod could detect bearing wear, pump cavitation, and alignment issues with an accuracy that impressed even skeptical customers. Some evenings, Michael would stand on his small balcony overlooking the Norfolk Naval Base, watching submarines come and go from the harbor. He could identify each class of submarine by the sound of its engines, even from a distance. The Virginia-class attack submarines had a distinct harmonic signature, different from the older Los Angeles-class boats. The massive Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines produced a deeper, more resonant sound that carried across the water. He'd wonder if any of those submarines were experiencing problems that his brass rod could solve, mechanical issues that traditional diagnostics might miss. But those thoughts were painful, reminders of a world he was no longer part of, expertise that was no longer wanted. Michael's submarine career had begun in 1975, during the height of the Cold War when submarine technology was advancing rapidly. He'd enlisted as a machinist's mate, drawn by the complex engineering challenges that submarine service presented. His first assignment was aboard the USS Sturgeon, a fast attack submarine that spent months at a time tracking Soviet submarines in the North Atlantic. It was aboard the Sturgeon that Michael first demonstrated his unusual acoustic abilities. During a routine patrol, the submarine's primary cooling pump began showing intermittent pressure fluctuations that defied explanation. The engineering team ran every diagnostic test available, replaced components, and recalibrated sensors, but couldn't identify the source of the problem. Michael, still a junior petty officer at the time, had been listening to the pump operation during his off-duty hours. Using a simple steel rod he'd found in the machine shop, he'd been monitoring the pump's acoustic signature. He'd noticed a subtle variation in the harmonic pattern that occurred only under specific operational conditions, when the submarine was at certain depths and speeds. When he brought his observations to the attention of the chief engineer, he was initially dismissed. Junior enlisted personnel weren't expected to solve problems that had stumped the engineering officers. But the pump problem was getting worse, and the chief was running out of options. Reluctantly, he allowed Michael to demonstrate his diagnostic method. Michael placed his steel rod against the pump housing and listened carefully as the submarine changed depth and speed. Within minutes, he'd identified the exact operational parameters that triggered the problem. His diagnosis revealed a resonance issue between the pump mounting system and the submarine's hull that occurred only under specific stress conditions. The repair was simple once the problem was properly identified. Adding vibration dampeners to the pump mounting points eliminated the resonance, but the implications were profound. A junior enlisted man using a piece of scrap metal had solved a problem that had baffled experienced engineers using sophisticated equipment. Word of Michael's diagnostic abilities spread throughout the submarine community. He was transferred to increasingly challenging assignments, working on the Navy's most advanced submarines and solving propulsion problems that stumped entire engineering teams. His methods became the stuff of legend, the engineer who could diagnose any mechanical problem just by listening. By the 1990s, Michael had become the Navy's go-to expert for complex submarine engineering problems. He'd worked on the development of the Seawolf-class submarines, contributing acoustic diagnostic techniques that helped optimize their revolutionary propulsion systems. His brass rod, by then a gift from his mentor, had helped solve problems on submarines from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Michael was in his workshop, calibrating a marine engine's timing when his cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was familiar. Norfolk Naval Base. "Thompson here," he answered, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. "Michael Thompson, this is Admiral Martinez, Atlantic Submarine Command." The voice was tense, urgent. "We have a situation that requires your expertise." Michael's heart rate increased slightly. He'd served under Martinez years earlier when the Admiral was still a captain. They'd worked together on the development of advanced propulsion monitoring systems. "Admiral Martinez." "It's been a long time." "Too long, Michael. Listen, we have a critical situation developing. The USS Montana is on a classified mission in the North Atlantic. Their primary propulsion system is experiencing catastrophic failures that our engineering teams can't diagnose. We've had our best people working on similar symptoms in dock, but they can't identify the root cause." Michael walked to his window, looking out toward the naval base in the distance. "What kind of failures?" "Intermittent power loss, cooling system fluctuations, harmonic vibrations that appear and disappear without pattern. It's like the entire propulsion system is gradually destabilizing, but our diagnostic equipment can't pinpoint why. The submarine is currently running on emergency power, but that won't last indefinitely." The description immediately triggered Michael's engineering instincts. The symptoms sounded like a complex resonance problem, possibly involving multiple systems interacting in ways that standard diagnostics wouldn't detect. It was exactly the type of problem that required acoustic analysis to properly understand. "How long do they have?" Michael asked. 48 hours, maybe less. "If we can't solve this, they'll have to abort the mission and emergency surface." "Michael, I know about what happened with the Virginia incident. I also know that investigation was wrong. We need you." Michael arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base at dawn, carrying his weathered toolbox and the brass rod that had been collecting dust for 5 years. The familiar sight of submarines lined up at the piers brought back a flood of memories, both proud and painful. Security personnel escorted him to the submarine engineering facility, a massive building housing replica engine systems used for training and problem diagnosis. Inside, a team of 6 naval engineers clustered around a full-scale mock-up of the Montana's propulsion system. Computer monitors displayed real-time telemetry from the submarine, showing the erratic patterns that had stumped the engineering team. Admiral Martinez stood at the center of the group, his face etched with concern. "Gentlemen, this is Michael Thompson," the Admiral announced. "He's here to provide additional diagnostic expertise." The lead engineer, Commander Sarah Chen, stepped forward with a skeptical expression. "Mr. Thompson, we've been monitoring this system for 18 hours. We've run every diagnostic protocol, analyzed thousands of data points, and consulted with propulsion experts from 3 different naval facilities. The problem appears to be systemic, but we can't identify any specific component failure." Michael approached the engine mock-up, noting the sophisticated sensor arrays and computer interfaces that hadn't existed during his active service. "What's the submarine's current operational status?" "Running on auxiliary power at minimal speed," Commander Chen replied. "The crew is safe, but they can't maintain mission parameters much longer. We estimate 36 hours before they have to surface." Michael opened his toolbox and withdrew the brass rod. Several of the younger engineers exchanged glances, their expressions clearly questioning why someone would bring such a primitive tool to solve a problem that modern technology couldn't address. "I need you to activate the propulsion system and replicate the failure conditions," Michael said. "And I need complete silence in the facility during the diagnostic." Commander Chen hesitated. "Mr. Thompson, with respect, we've already run extensive acoustic analysis using digital monitoring equipment. Our sound detection systems are far more sensitive than any manual diagnostic method." "Your equipment measures amplitude and frequency," Michael replied calmly. "I listen for patterns and relationships that computers can't interpret. May I proceed?" Admiral Martinez nodded to Commander Chen, who reluctantly initiated the startup sequence. The mock-up engine came to life, its complex systems mimicking the exact operational parameters of the submarine's propulsion plant. Within minutes, the telemetry displays began showing the same erratic patterns that had plagued the Montana. Michael placed one end of the brass rod against the main bearing housing and positioned the other end against his ear. He closed his eyes and focused entirely on the acoustic signature of the system. The initial sounds were normal, the steady rhythm of pumps, the whisper of coolant circulation, the subtle harmonics of rotating machinery. But as the system reached full operational parameters, Michael detected something that the computer sensors had missed. There was a phase relationship between 2 different harmonic frequencies, one from the propulsion motor and another from the cooling circulation pumps. The frequencies weren't quite synchronized, creating a beating pattern that gradually destabilized the entire system. "Shut it down," Michael ordered after 15 minutes of listening. He stepped away from the brass rod and turned to face the engineering team. "The problem isn't mechanical failure, it's harmonic interference between the main propulsion motor and the secondary cooling pumps. The frequencies are close enough to create a beat pattern, but the computers can't detect it because they're analyzing each system independently." Commander Chen frowned. "That's impossible. Those systems operate on completely different frequency ranges. There's no way they could create interference patterns." "They're not interfering directly," Michael explained. "The resonance is occurring through the submarine's hull structure. The motor creates vibrations at 47. 3 Hz, the pumps at 47. 8 Hz, the beat frequency of 0. 5 Hz is what's causing the gradual destabilization. Your computer systems are designed to filter out such low-frequency variations as background noise." The engineering team looked skeptical until Admiral Martinez spoke up. "Run the frequency analysis on those specific parameters," he ordered. Commander Chen reluctantly programmed the computers to analyze the exact frequencies Michael had identified. Within minutes, the displays confirmed the presence of the beat pattern he'd described. The 0, 5 Hz oscillation was clearly visible once they knew what to look for. "The solution is phase synchronization," Michael continued. "Adjust the pump motor speeds to eliminate the beat frequency and the system will stabilize." The computer modeling confirmed Michael's diagnosis within hours. Engineers programmed the frequency adjustments he'd recommended, and the simulated propulsion system immediately stabilized. The telemetry from the USS Montana showed the same positive results when the crew implemented the modifications. The harmonic interference disappeared, and the submarine's propulsion system returned to normal operation. Commander Chen approached Michael as he was packing his toolbox. Her earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional respect. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. I've been working with submarine propulsion systems for 8 years, and I've never encountered anything like that harmonic interaction. How did you know to look for such a specific frequency relationship?" Michael smiled, placing the brass rod carefully in its customized foam padding. "Experience teaches you that submarines are living systems, not just collections of mechanical components. Every sound has meaning, every vibration tells a story. Sometimes the most sophisticated equipment can miss the simple relationships that create complex problems." Admiral Martinez joined them, carrying a manila envelope. "Michael, I want to thank you personally for saving the Montana and her crew. But more than that, I want to address the injustice that forced you into retirement." He handed Michael the envelope. "This contains a formal review of the Virginia incident, conducted by an independent panel of submarine engineering experts. Their conclusion is unambiguous. Your original diagnosis was correct. The investigation team in 2018 lacked the expertise to properly evaluate your acoustic assessment." Michael opened the envelope, finding official Navy letterhead and multiple signatures. The document was a complete vindication, acknowledging that his emergency surface recommendation had likely prevented a serious reactor cooling incident. The intermittent resonance problem he'd detected had been confirmed through advanced modeling techniques that hadn't been available during the original investigation. "There's more," Admiral Martinez continued. "The Secretary of the Navy has approved a formal apology for the mishandling of your case, along with full restoration of your service record. Your retirement status has been changed from early separation to retirement with distinction. You're also being awarded the Navy Meritorious Civilian Service Award for your contribution to submarine safety." But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Commander Chen stepped forward with something in her hands. A brass rod, identical to Michael's but newly crafted. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like to learn your acoustic diagnostic methods. This rod was made by the same machinist who crafted yours 40 years ago. He's retired now, but he still remembers Master Chief Mitchell's specifications." Michael examined the new rod, noting the careful attention to weight, balance, and surface finish. "Commander, these techniques can't be learned from manuals or computer simulations. They require patience, practice, and the willingness to trust your ears over your instruments." "I understand," she replied. "But I also understand that we nearly lost a submarine and her crew because we relied too heavily on technology and not enough on human expertise. I don't want that to happen again." Admiral Martinez extended his hand to Michael. "There's one more thing. The Navy would like to offer you a position as a senior consultant for submarine engineering. Part-time, civilian status, but with full access to our facilities and the authority to train the next generation of acoustic diagnostic specialists." Michael shook the Admiral's hand, feeling something that had been missing for 5 years, the sense that his expertise was valued, that his methods had worth, that his career had meaning beyond the bureaucratic mistake that had ended it prematurely. As he walked toward the base exit, Michael could hear the distant sound of submarines preparing for sea duty. The Montana was among them, her crew confident in their propulsion systems thanks to an old brass rod and the man who knew how to use it. To everyone who typed expertise and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.